Greetings and welcome to another episode of Informal Logic, Criticisms of Irrelevance. That being said, please hit the like if you just joined. Make sure the notifications get out there so more people come in, and let's get right down to it. So as we wait for everyone to arrive in here, let's look at a bit about the author of the book that I've adapted this presentation from. It's from a book called Informal Logic, and it's an introductory guidebook to the basic principles of constructing sound arguments and criticizing bad ones. Non-technical in approach, it is based on 186 examples, which the author, Douglas Walton, a leading authority in the field of informal logic, discusses and evaluates in clear, illustrative detail. Walton explains how errors, fallacies, and other key failures of argument occur. He shows how correct uses of argument are based on sound strategies for reasoned persuasion and critical responses. Among the many subjects covered, which we do in this presentations here, but I was going to say here, this edition does take into account many new developments in the field, as we saw there with the Al Gore rhythm example there, of argumentation study that have occurred since 1989, many created by the author. Drawing on these developments, Walton includes and analyzes 36 new topical examples and also brings in recent work on argumentation schemes. This is ideally suited for courses in informal logic and introduction to philosophy. So, well, I guess one of the things of these, let's read a bit more about the author here. As I see the notifications still haven't gone out. Douglas Walton is Distinguished Research Fellow of the CRRAR, the Center for Research in Reasoning, Argumentation, and Rhetoric, at the University of Windsor, and Assumption University Chair in Argumentation Studies at the University of Windsor. The author of more than 30 books, he has received major research grants from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and the Isaac Walton, I'm not sure if it's relation to him or not, Killam Memorial Foundation. He was awarded the ISSA Prize by the International Society for the Study of Argumentation for his contributions to research on fallacies, argumentation, and, topic of today, informal logic, among many honors he has received for his achievements. So, illustrious author. It's a well-written book, but again, being the context it is something for introductory courses and universities and such that I have adapted it to be a slideshow so that we can consume it more easily here on this YouTube channel. That said, let's get to it. Oops. Ah, Lord. There it goes. Okay, informal logic, the criticisms of irrelevance. That didn't work. All right, the introduction. Relevance is central to evaluating arguments. Irrelevance derails discussion. So relevance is central, but irrelevance derails discussions. It wastes time, and it clouds judgment. Learning to spot irrelevance makes you sharper, fairer, and harder to mislead. So, allegations of irrelevance, the concept. There's the ignoratio elenchi, and this is ignoring the issue. But I think that's a little too brief. I think that's even pretty much ignoring the refutation, I think, is Aristotle's way of saying it. But rather than listen to my interpretation, this is something that's best for us to go over to Black's Law Dictionary. And let's do that with a quick deep dive into this word here. Zoom in a bit and move on down. And let's see where we are here. And we're looking for ignoramus. What a great word here. We do not know. Ignoramus. Okay. Ignacio. Here we go. There it is. Ignacio ignoratio elenchi. They say ignoratio elenchi or elenchi, however you like to see it. I think elenchi is just easier. And that's from Latin, the ignorance of the conclusion to be proved, from the 16th century. For this legal term, of course, comes back probably to Aristotle, I believe. The ignorance of the conclusion to be proved, an advocate's misunderstanding of an opponent's position, manifested by an argument that fails to address the opponent's point, the overlooking of an opponent's counter-argument. The fallacy of logic often involves an advocate's trying to prove something that is immaterial to the point to be decided. Immaterial meaning it's not part of that central issue to the point being decided. So this is something where they'll argue that this is, one thing when you're trying to avert something else. So they're trying to ignore ignorance of your conclusion to be proved. They're trying to prove a different conclusion. Ignoratio elenchi, a good one to know. I keep trying to say this one over here. Here it is. Ignorantia juris non excusat. So that's ignorance of the law is no excuse, we've always heard. And it's a legal requirement or prohibition is never an excuse to a criminal charge. And of course, we've heard ignorance of the law is no excuse, often shortened to ignorantia juris. So almost the only knowledge of law possessed by many people is that ignorance is no excuse. The ignorantia juris non excusat. This maxim was originally formulated at a time when the list of crimes, broadly speaking, represented current morality. But we now have many other crimes that are the result of administrative or social regulation, mala prohibita, which are equally governed by the maxim. The rule is then that whereas ignorance of the fact can excuse to the extent that it negatives mens rea or fault, ignorance of the law generally does not. So there we go, textbook of criminal law from 1978. All right, let's get back to the topic. So once again, ignoratio elenchi, ignoring the issue. This is the root concept of irrelevance. It occurs when someone proves something that sounds good, but doesn't answer the real question. So something superficial. The takeaway here is don't be impressed by arguments that miss the real target. All right, to the next. Allegations of irrelevance. The housing bill example. A particular proposal for housing legislation is under consideration. A senator rises to speak in favor of the bill. However, his whole argument is directed to the conclusion that all people should have decent housing. Let's think about this now. It's a particular proposal for housing legislation. And his argument is directed to the conclusion, his whole argument, that all people should have decent housing. The takeaway here is that noble-sounding claims are irrelevant if they avoid the decision at hand, which was housing legislation. Always ask, does this prove the point we're debating? So sure, all people should have decent housing. But does that mean that this housing legislation that's under consideration should pass? He rises to speak in favor of the bill. But how are you making that connection between all people having decent housing and this particular legislation under consideration? And then there's global irrelevance. Let's go over this concept. Global irrelevance is when the whole argument drifts off course. It's seen in debates or trials where the issue is narrowly defined. The takeaway here is watch whether the big picture still matches the claim. This is something that, again, is seen a lot in debates Let's go back to this other one here, because this is something when in debates or trials where the issue is narrowly defined, it's not permitted to start to drift off course like that. So you always watch whether the big picture still matches the claims. As claims are brought up, is it drifting off course, or are they still directed towards the central claim? Yet issues are narrowly defined in trials and debates and formal structures. Global irrelevance, prosecutor example. The prosecuting attorney in a criminal trial is supposed to prove that the defendant is guilty of murder. However, the prosecuting attorney argues at length that murder is a horrible crime. He holds up the victim's bloody shirt for the jury to see. He expostulates at length on the horrors of this crime and all crimes of murder. The takeaway here is emotion can inflame, but not prove. You always have to ask, are they showing guilt or just outrage? Key one here about irrelevance. Emotion can inflame, but not prove. Are you showing guilt or outrage? Here's a question, answer, relevance concept. So the question, answer, relevance is the local irrelevance, when a reply doesn't match the question. The questions themselves can also be irrelevant. So think about this. You ask a question, the reply doesn't match a question, or a question is asked that is irrelevant, so no question, no answer or reply would suffice. The takeaway here is spot when the subject has been quietly changed. Keep your eye on the subject, the main central issue, and that way the question, answer, relevance won't step in here. The local relevance is when a reply doesn't match the questions, but the questions themselves can be irrelevant. Another question, answer, relevance example here. This is the dean and the reporter. So the reporter at the university is saying, I am concerned about affirmative action programs and would like to ask, how many of the proposed faculty cuts at the university are women's positions? The dean responds, only one position in the Women's Studies department will be cut, but that is balanced by the new proposal for the Women's Studies chair, which will mean adding a new position to the Women's Studies. The reporter replies, my question wasn't about women's studies. I want to know how many. Who are the women will be cut. So the takeaway from this is that the partial answers can be evasions. Keep pressing for the real answer. He talked about women's studies, and this is easy because he asked about women's positions. Oh, you mean the women's studies positions? So it's partial answers. He's even responding as if it's a partial question with his partial answer. So these can be evasions. Keep pressing for the real answer. So my question wasn't about women's studies. I want to know how many. Who are the women will be cut? All right, here's a question answer relevance with Sir Charles and Sir Philip. Sir Philip says, you don't think it's more dangerous to export these fancy goods to foreign countries than, say, children's crackers? And Sir Charles replies, well, I nearly lost an eye with a Christmas cracker, but never with a gun. So the takeaway here is humor and ridicule can mask irrelevance. Don't let jokes change the issue. If you didn't get the joke, remember this guy's Canadian, so there's a little bit of this seems like, I'm not sure if this is British Canadian humor, but these fancy goods they're talking about are guns. So he's looking at an arms dealer trading guns and exporting them, and he's saying it's more dangerous to export guns than it would be firecrackers for children, right? And Sir Charles says, I nearly lost an eye with a Christmas cracker, firecracker, but never with a gun. So it's supposed to be funny because that's kind of an old joke, but it's also not getting to the point of the argument here. He's talking about the dangerousness of a particular export. As the subject wasn't Christmas crackers and losing an eye with the Christmas cracker. So it's a joke. Don't let it change the issue. Humor and ridicule can mask irrelevance. And on we go. Another one of the question answer relevance. Detroit mayor interview. We have Mrs. Frum or Froome. The murder rate this year is so far is over 300 people murdered in Detroit. Do you feel that this represents a failure or problem from your point of view as mayor? And the mayor says, "You are asking me questions about this high murder rate in Detroit. That is not the question. Other cities like New York also have high rates. The topic is No Crime Day." So they're having a holiday, No Crime Day. That's why the Mrs. Froome was there. "This murder rate question is not relevant." And Mrs. Froome says, "Well, yes, it really is relevant." The takeaway here is leaders may dismiss tough questions as irrelevant. Don't let them set the terms of relevance for you. Ooh, that's a good one right there. So remember, the whole thing was about murder rate. Even No Crime Day might have to do with murders, but her question was specifically about the murder rate. Is it a failure or a problem? And he says, today is No Crime Day. This is all we're going to talk about. Your question's not relevant. And she says, well, yes, it really is relevant. We see this quite often with politicians. Now, setting an agenda, concept. This is a good thing to do because agenda keep discussions focused. Irrelevance occurs when new issues are inserted that don't fit. So the agenda prevents insertion of irrelevant issues. The takeaway here is respect the agenda, but notice when someone tries to hijack it. So, back to agreement before dialogue to ensure that there's an agenda set and everyone sticks to it so that there are no new issues inserted where irrelevance can occur. And on to the next. Should be there soon. Come on. Setting an agenda. Library hours meeting. Let's see this. Harry says, not only should the library remain open longer so that students can have a place to study, but student tuition fees should be lowered as well. But Pam says, hold on, Harry. The topic of this meeting is the proposal for the extension of library hours. What does the topic of tuition fees have to do with it? So the takeaway here is even related issues can be off limits when the agenda is narrow, as in issues like this, these meetings, trials, debates. When the agenda is narrowly defined, then you have to stick to it. Even related issues might be off limits. So as he does here, but the student tuition fee should be lowered as well, slipping that one in. Of course, these go both ways. When there's a town hall meeting, they saying you must stick to these particular topics. You can do the same thing. They're having a thing about the library hours meeting. You can say not only should the library remain open longer so that students can have a place to study, but you should remove all those AI surveillance cameras that you're installing all around the lunch hall. Things like that. You could always. So that's a rhetorical way of hijacking an agenda. But I digress. So we're on to the red herring versus wrong conclusion. The concept here is a wrong conclusion is proving something other than the target claim. So you come to a conclusion, but it's not the target claim. A red herring is dragging in irrelevant material to distract. So our takeaway from this is ask this question. Does this prove the right claim or just grab attention? And again, the red herring is an old term from the old upper crust fox hunts, where they would go out with their hounds to go hunt foxes in the woods. But it's kind of stacked in their favor. They have firearms and hounds and horses and everything else to go catch the fox. So to put a little sport in the game, someone would come out beforehand with a red herring fish and rub some miscellaneous trees along the way to kind of run the hounds off course and give the fox a sporting chance, and drag the hunt out a little bit longer so they can enjoy the sport of the hunt for more time. So that's where that term comes from. It's a distraction. So we're on to the wrong conclusion. This one's on children's education. Instead of proving that a man does not have the right to educate his children in the way he thinks best, you show that the way in which he educates his child is not really the best. So the takeaway here is substituting a nearby point is a subtle but misleading dodge. So instead of proving that a man does not have the right to educate his children in the way he thinks best, so freedom of choice is what we're talking about here, you show that the way in which he educates his child is not really the best, passing some judgment here based on someone else's standard. So you see how this nearby point is a subtle but misleading dodge. All right, we're on to another red herring here with Professor Conway. Professor Conway complains of inadequate parking on our campus. But did you know that last year Conway carried on a torrid love affair with a member of the English department? The two used to meet every day for clandestine sex in the copier room. Apparently, they didn't realize how much you can see through that fogged glass window. Even the students got an eyeful. Enough said about Conway. The takeaway here is character attacks and gossip are classic distractions. Classic distractions. Always return to the real issue. So, Professor Conway complained of inadequate parking on our campus. But did you know he had no parking on the dance floor in the copier room? So yeah, these are classic distractions. But I digress. All right, so varieties of irrelevance. We have some common forms: the wrong conclusion, the distracting parallels, the exaggerating burden, the irrelevant premises, failure to refute opponent, subject matter failure, and confusing issues. And our takeaway here in very fine print: different tactics, same result. Moving away from the issue. So we see all the ways we can have irrelevance inserted into arguments, any kind of dialogues, trials, debates. Once you start hearing wrong conclusions, distracting parallels, nearby issues, exaggerating burdens with emotional appeals, irrelevant premises, failure to refute opponent by not answering the question or using irrelevant questions, subject matter failure, and confusing issues. Okay, and we're on to varieties of irrelevance. Margie and Taster's Choice. Your friend Margie says that Taster's Choice coffee tastes better than Folgers. Apparently, she is ignoring the fact that Taster's Choice is made by Nestle, and Nestle is a company that manufactured that terrible baby formula for third world countries. Thousands of babies died when the dry milk formula was mixed with contaminated water. Obviously, your friend is mistaken. Takeaway from here is ethics matter, but they don't answer a taste test. Match your argument to the claim. So there could be a reason not to drink one over the other or spend money buying one over the other, but that doesn't change, or that doesn't answer the question of taste, which was a central issue. Then we have other varieties of irrelevance. And let's listen to Alfred on gun control. Alfred contends that if gun control is not introduced in Alabama, there will be much greater incidence of violent crime. However, during the course of his argument, Alfred stresses that the majority of people in Alabama have been strongly against gun control. Alfred concludes that gun control will not be introduced in Alabama. So, the takeaway here is predicting politics is not the same as proving consequences. Separate evidence from opinion. Separate evidence from opinion. So, he's making opinions here, right? But the question here is that gun control and violent crime. He stresses that people in Alabama are against gun control, so it will not be introduced. Again, predicting the politics doesn't prove the consequences. So he's saying there will be much higher incidence of violent crime. And in this way here, it can also be some other fallacies within this, but as you can see, very finely woven in here. He contends that if gun control is not introduced in Alabama, there will be much greater incidence. So this doesn't really necessarily follow. This is an opinion. However, during the course of his argument, he stresses that the majority of people in Alabama have been strongly against gun control, as if this would have anything to do with the goal that he stated here in the beginning, the incidence of violent crime. So now he concludes that gun control will not be introduced in Alabama. See, during the course, a majority have been against it. So he's using the opinion here from any kind of evidence. But it seems like he is. All right, here's some more varieties of irrelevance. So Senator Martin on Windsor. When I read this, I was incensed. Those of us who live here know that Windsor is not a grimy city. It is a city that has one of the best flower parks in Canada. It is a city of fine schools, hard-working, and tolerant people. So the takeaway here. Strong cases are weakened by irrelevant extras. Quality matters more than quantity. So as you see here, he was incensed that somebody wrote that Windsor was a grimy city. He mentioned a fact here that is relevant. The city has one of the best flower parks in Canada. So, what kind of grimy city has the best flower park in Canada? But then he went on to add irrelevant extras such as the fine schools and the hardworking and tolerant people. So by adding those irrelevant extras, he weakens his case because he already had a strong case. We're on to the summary now. For those of you who made it this far, salute to you. Global irrelevance. The whole case misses. Then there's local irrelevance. Specific answers or premises miss. So like the answers, question, answer relevance. 2 check tests here we got. Subject matter. Is it even on the same topic? So that's one check. 2 key checks for relevance. The subject matter, is it even on the same topic? And probative. Does it help or prove or disprove the claim? So is it on the same topic? And then the information, does it have anything to do with proving or disproving the claim? So the takeaway from this is that every discussion has 2 filters, on topic and on point. Now think, this is a very important distinction, that every discussion has 2 filters. So you have to review the irrelevance factor here and understanding that irrelevance from 2 different sides each time you go to assess it. There's a subject matter filter. Is it on the same topic? And a probative. Does it help prove or disprove the claim? The claim before you even, when you're talking about the local relevance. So every discussion has the 2 filters, on topic and on point. All right, so we have some closing inspiration here. Relevance keeps reasoning clear and honest. Irrelevance confuses, distracts, or manipulates. And for a final thought, staying alert to irrelevance helps you cut through noise, demand answers, and keep dialogue anchored to truth. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. I hope a lot of you were able to get something out of it. I know it's kind of a dry topic in a way. We try to spice it up with a little bit of excitement throughout there. But again, reading from the text would be even more dry. So I try to bring it together in these little presentations here, and hopefully we'll be able to get through this entire text here, which has just the kind of information that everyone probably should learn in elementary school. This shouldn't even be a graduate level text or anything of such. These are elementary concepts that everybody needs to know to be able to handle their own affairs in a fair and honest way. That said, salute to you all for being here, and I'll see you all on the next one. Peace out.